You too. Thank you so much for having me again. I am always grateful for being able to share my hard-earned wisdom. My name is Kelly Whalen. I have been engaged consciously in stillness practices probably inadvertently since before I was a year old. And I will say that because of, the reality of losing my fingertips when I was a year old and spending basically the first 10 years of my life in constant pain, having to deal with managing my pain. Um, the juxtaposition of having such an event happen before I was even a year old and losing my fingertips really changed my self awareness because I had to develop it really, really early. And also the fact that I had to learn at a very young age how to be comfortable with not just discomfort, but extreme and extremely painful discomfort from the get go. A little bit more about me. My day job has been as a policy analyst and a community strategist. Last 20 years, focusing primarily on First Nation work and mapping land usage and traditional knowledge. I've done an incredible amount of ceremony with Medewan societies, healers, and elders, law keepers in the First Nation communities here in Manitoba, which has been profoundly eye-opening and educational experience to say the least. I myself, I have Mi'kmaq and Wyandot lineages that I come from. And with regards to my mindfulness practice, just going back to the basic baseline that I grew up with, not having my fingertips and having sort of like a dark night of the soul anytime I'd smash them or scrape them or cause myself pain for them. I've also spent the last, see, how old am I? My grandpa taught me how to box when I was 8 to deal with bullies. So it's been 42 years since I started my journey into the pugilistic systems and the martial arts. And I also grew up with asthma and bronchitis, and the asthma would land me in the hospital and pretty much almost kill me 4 or 5 times a year. I wake up in the hospital and, under the shiny lights. And I had to learn how to cope with that fear. And combining the asthma and my fingertips really sort of gave me an inadvertent um, concrete baseline of understanding mindfulness, even though at a young age I didn't know what it was. I have been studying Qigong since I was 12, and I looked into it because of my asthma, because I wanted to understand how to heal my body, how to strengthen my body, and not be afraid of my body and to feel safe in my body. And this has sort of formed the nexus or the core of my understanding of mindfulness is how to be safe in my body through all these formative experiences. The martial arts that I've specialized in the last 20 years, Bagua and Xingyi Lohe Chun, the 10 animal Xingyi of Lu Song Gao and Yu Ho Long. My Bagua comes from lineage of Pei Zhidong through Eric Tuttle and my first teacher Mark, and then my current Bagua teacher Andrea Falk, who is a bit of a legend in the martial arts world. She is an amazing, amazing teacher, an amazing martial artist. She's written books that have sort of changed people's perceptions about some of the Chinese internal arts, like Tai Chi and Bagua. I mean, it's very uncommon to have the horseshoes or the rabbit ears that I seem to have when it comes to the internal arts and to qigong. Uh, 25 years ago, I discovered a teacher of Grandmaster Peng Julin's Shaolin One Finger Zen and Lohan medical qigong, and this is something that I have worked on for 25 years. It is a lot of standing stake. If people know what standing stake is, feel free to raise your hand. It's the funnest part of qigong, and it's also the hardest part of qigong because you have to hold a posture and you have to do the finger bending to open up the meridians in the body, to strengthen the meridians, to learn how to feel in your body the amplification of the sensitivity to the chi as it moves through your body. When I started first learning the system, it changed my whole concept of what an internal art really was. And I really, it was very humbling. I will fully admit that. Profoundly humbling because I realized I did not understand what an internal art was. I had the concepts and learning the physical aspects of how to be still to listen to the body from such a minute point of reference of feeling the chi run through the body and run the body. Over the last 25 years, it never ceases to amaze me how much or how deep the aspect of stillness in our awareness can actually get. And my revelations about stillness come from direct experience, uh, especially with the medical qigong, learning how to let my body be lifted up by chi running through my body instead of using my muscles. You letting my mind relax into my body so that I could understand how to listen to my bones and how my bones were sitting while I was standing in order to relax my entire system so that the chi could run instead of tensing up and trying to hold my body up, which is, I mean, the first stage. Learning the system uh, taught me how I didn't know how to listen, which for, the ego mind, which is very judgmental, was very hard at first. Very hard, very humbling, profoundly ego crushing. I mean, I can look back and I can laugh now. But the contrast in terms of how much the standing stake changed, how much, I mean, I was practicing standing stake before. Bagua circle walking is all about walking a circle, holding a posture, and relaxing into your structure so that you can walk for a really long time and develop innate, instinctual, almost a primal level of awareness of the body that way. With the medical qigong, you go even deeper into the body by letting yourself relax even more and basically forcing your body to be still or holding one posture while you are subtly engaging the meridians to draw chi through the body into the hands and into the fingers. Very unique experience. I recommend it for everybody. You may not want to go as far as I have because it is a commitment. It is a serious daily commitment. And along the way, the big thing that I learned about myself was how violent my mind was, how judgmental my mind was, and how easy, especially at first, how easy it was for my ego and my shadow to hijack my mind and get me to think about other things instead of listening. And again, you don't have to learn medical qigong, but cannot overstate or overemphasize how important it is to learn standing stake, Zhamzhang qigong, and to go through the process of learning how to listen to the body through that art. In the process of, at first when I was learning the medical qigong, there was a space where I was like excited because I was gonna, learn something new. I was gonna, put it on my martial arts or my qigong resume and be able to promote myself as this healer. And the biggest learning that I had was that I didn't understand how to heal myself. I didn't understand until I went through this process of needing to be still and quiet with these postures so that I could feel whether or not the chi was actually running properly in my body. I didn't understand how aggressive my ego and my shadow really were to controlling my perception of reality. And this is really where violence in the mind comes from, is the need of the ego to control our reality and to project outward at people, at our environment, into our world, this control so that we feel safe. And this is the normal function of the ego. This is the normal function of the ego. And then we have the super ego and the id, where with the base primitive aspects of the mind, when the id framework are sort of like the root motivation that fuels the ego. So when we're talking about mindfulness, it is super important to also be open. I mean, you have to be open to understanding how judgment and how the ego and how the shadow hijack the mind. And this, you can sit and you can meditate, and you'll achieve a certain level of awareness of this reality inside our personalities and inside the ego mind and the shadow framework that tries to hide behind the ego, behind the mask of the ego. But when you start forcing yourself, and you have to have a discipline where you understand that the control of forcing yourself to learn stillness is not a bad thing, because it is through discipline that we can free ourselves, through discipline of listening and softening our minds and quieting our minds to be able to see how aggressive the ego and the shadow really are to controlling our minds, our personalities, how we express the masks that we wear around people in the outside world, and what that tells us about ourselves. When we listen to ourselves, we can learn literally everything that we ever need to know about our own spiritual evolution, about the energy in our body, how our mind is actually expressing its information, and whether or not that information is ego based or whether or not it is mindfully based in self observation and stillness. A lot of the training that I've done, I've been a power lifter. I was a bodybuilder in my 20s. Um, and that was, being a bodybuilder was interesting because, again, carry over from my full contact karate and needing to sort of have that aggressive mindset of power from a physical sense. And it's always come back to my fingers. The irony of having this happen when I was a year old is constantly reminding me when I lose track of being aligned and being quiet and in observation. I didn't understand what my subconscious was constantly trying to show me. Smashing my fingers, scraping my fingers, and the extreme pain that would cause so much anger and rage to come to the surface. And as a kid, it's like, I don't want to take this out on my friends. I don't want them to be scared. I don't want to, like, affect my friendships by being, stupid and being angry in their direction. And it caused me to develop an understanding that, anger is not the best choice for expression, even when there is reason to be angry at someone. Being angry and being rage filled from the pain. Just, I'd be having a great day, but I'd lose track of where my body was. I would lose track of being aware of my body. I would get caught in an emotion, and I would invariably smash or scrape my fingers and cause myself pain. A lot of the times it would just like drop me to the floor, and I would be curled up in a fetal position, holding my fingers. And the only way that the pain would subside or go away is if I relaxed myself. And again, at that age, I didn't understand what I was doing because it was so instinctive and it was so primal, just dealing with the pain. Until I started, years later as a teenager, investigating Buddhism and meditation and learning Qigong and curing myself of my asthma with my Qigong practice. And having my fingertips missing since, I was like it happened when I was like 8, 9 months old. It's been such a constant part of my life, my physical experience, my nervous system's experience, that in a lot of ways I just dismissed it, and it's just so normal to me that I did not understand the toolbox the whole experience with missing my fingertips had actually given me until I started getting into the standing stick, until I started really digging deep into the medical qigong and spending time forcing myself to be physically still. Anytime I was physically still, it would make my mind and my ego actually bring things to the surface, stories, movies, and other things that were of a triggering nature because they were stagnant chi. They were stagnant emotional energy that was stuck in my body. That once I actually relaxed to a certain degree, it actually allowed me to see the stories that I've been telling myself of judgment, of anger, the really intense, stagnant emotional spaces that keep us stuck in stories. These are what came to the surface when I was doing standing stick. I feel my indigenous roots, and I was talking to Donna earlier. I have, as I said, Mi'kmaq and Wyandot heritage. My family's been in Canada for 300 years or so. I feel that the innate ancestral memory, or the cellular memory, if you will, the deep subconscious aspects of my First Nations heritage caused me to go and sit by the river, caused me to spend so much time out in nature. Like I grew up in 30 acres of bush just south of Winnipeg, Manitoba. Um, I cannot put into words how grateful I am for having that as my formative experience of being able to constantly be in nature, especially as after a stressful day in school, like just being able to go and walk out in the bush or go and sit by the river. It's absolutely phenomenal. Growing up, my mom made sure that I was very aware of my roots. She encouraged both my mom and dad encouraged investigation into First Nation tradition. Through my work, it really got amplified because of working with First Nations. Um, in terms of being introduced into community, my mom and I would go into a community, and I would invariably be the one that would join the ceremony. I've lost track of how many sweat lodges I've done. I've also done a lot of pipe ceremonies. There's Sundance I've been to. I haven't actually done Sundance myself. I've participated as an observer, which is a profoundly unique experience. The inclination to be in nature is a very human thing. And, you know, coming to North America, we have this insistence, if you will, as sort of a settler nation, Canada, United States, where we look at indigenous culture as separate from European culture, except European culture has its own indigenous culture too. Whether or not, depending on how far back you go into the Celtic frameworks, the Norse frameworks, the Mediterranean frameworks, there are indigenous cultures all over the world that have just been there forever and have been so normalized within those countries and in those regions that we forget. And then we have this contrast with the indigenous and the First Nations here in North America, where we sort of go, oh, that's First Nation, that's indigenous. But you have to remember, every single one of us comes from an inherent indigenous culture, whether or not it's from 300 years ago in Europe or Africa or Asia or wherever your roots come from. Your roots are your roots. And this energy, this ancestral memory will come through in actions that you have and frameworks that you have in your current life. And this is the way the past works in the present. I honestly do feel that, I mean, also you got to understand, half my family's Mennonite, and the Mennonite tradition that I grew up in was all about the land. all about caring for the land, all about respecting the land. My grandfather was a Mennonite bishop, equivalent of a Catholic bishop, an Altester in his community. So I got to see an awful lot of farms. I got to hear as a young kid a profound amount of stories from farmers from inside the Mennonite community, even the Amish or the Hutterite community that we have here in Manitoba. Is the Hutterite community is really really big. The subconscious draw to be in nature played a profound part in my development of self awareness. I, again, so lucky growing up in the country, so lucky being able to just walk out into the bush whenever I needed it. Some of the best kind of therapy being in nature. And nature has this natural space of yin and yang balance expressed energetically that helps remind us of how to feel that present moment, how to be mindful, how to feel, because you have, all the trees, or even walking through a glen or a glade or a clearing. There's the word I was looking for. There's so many little clearings in the bush where I live, where we'll have toadstools, like little fairy rings and stuff like that. I was telling Donna earlier that the old Métis, and Métis is the mix of settler and colonial blood with First Nations blood. Métis river lot that I live on or grew up on, um, that we're hoping to turn into a retreat center down the road. There's 30 acres of bush. It's beautiful. It's on the Red River. Just gonna put that out there. Uh, I grew up where you had teepee rings. There's like three main teepee rings, and there's sort of partial rings around it, where it's unmistakable. The thing that causes these rings are the hide from the teepees dissolving into the ground around them, sitting for a long period of time on the ground, stones holding it down. My great uncles in southern Ontario, one of who was Pierre Elliott Trudeau's agricultural minister, had the family lot in southern Ontario, in Amherstburg, at the back by the stream, used to have the same thing. And this is where I understood as a kid, because there were also First Nation artifacts that were in the family home that no one talked about, because it wasn't politically correct to indicate that you had First Nation ancestry back in the 50s and 60s. And it's still a contentious thing here in Canada. The the subconscious and the ancestral memory again kind of like kicked in, where when I saw these rings out at the family plot in Amherstburg, I immediately knew what they were, because I grew up with them, like walking through these teepee rings out at the farm, being aware of the heritage, being aware of the history, and the context of the history gave me an appreciation and a way to understand uh ancestral memory, or subconscious energy when it comes to the surface. And instead of growing up with a judgment or violent um, self judgment of my history, I recognized the value as a young kid of understanding where I came from. And I kind of, growing up, I kept it to myself, even though, you know, as a kid, you don't, I was small. Again, this is why I got into the martial arts. I got into Qigong to heal myself, to get stronger. And at school, going to a French Catholic school, if you're anything other than French and Catholic, you got picked on mercilessly. So I kept my Métis, or my First Nation and Indigenous lineages, to myself, because it was a very racist environment that I grew up in, very antagonistic, very violent. Which is the thing that got me really depressed in grade 5, because I was constantly getting picked on and getting into fights, and I didn't want to hurt anybody. And my grandpa was like, "I'm gonna fix that. I'm gonna teach you how to box so that you understand how not to hurt people, but to educate them on how to leave you alone and why." On a personal level, like having to cope with how angry I was whenever I banged my fingers as a kid. And doesn't cause me pain the way it used to, but Looking back, because hindsight's always 2020, and one of the things that has really deepened this awareness. I mean, I knew before that I had a really good handle and a really good understanding of you know being able to step into observation, being able to step into stillness at the drop of a hat, and being able to stay there for long periods of time. But when Kelly and her kids moved in, my partner and her kids moved in just before COVID happened, watching them as teenagers grow through school and work through things, and realizing that, like, how different my teenage years were, because I didn't go through the huge explosions. I didn't of emotional space, other than when I would be so exhausted emotionally from the violence that would happen, the rage that would happen in my head when I would hurt my fingertips, that everything else sort of paled in comparison. And it wasn't until I had this space with these teenagers in my life constantly that I really began to understand how different I worked, and how different my perception of my priorities, my life, and like everything really was. And I had never really tracked back through how I got here, because I'm just so busy training, teaching, helping my parents, working, doing life. The whole experience of having kids around me 24/7, teenagers, you know, going through their hormones, going through their big emotions, going through their learning experiences, and realizing like how, when I was that age, how different my priorities were, how essential it was for me to have space to sit with myself and to be alone, to be in solitude, to cope with the spaces that I was moving through. I mean, up until I was about 20 or 21, my fingers cracked and bled on a constant, all the time. One of the things that I realized, because I come from a political family, as I said, is that I realized that I had very, very aggressive political ideology, or opinions on politics. My grandparents helped found the NDP here in Canada, so I was very much a New Democratic Party person for a really, really long time. Even though my grandpa would sit me on his knee and explain to me because he's an MLA, worked with Tommy Douglas here in Canada to set up the Medicare system in Saskatchewan that was then later adopted federally. Um, Politics was one of my first indications of how violent my mind was, even though I had the space that I'd step into in terms of being able to control and calm my rage and my anger down from my fingers. I began to understand that some of the family dialogue was just pure anger based, pure judgment based. Anything that is a judgment that is based in anger, where you get that little knot of emotional high physically, that that little like self-righteous, oh yeah, it's like I'm so right about this. It's like everyone else is like wrong. That emotional high that we get from judgment, that is violence of the mind. That is one of the things that when I stepped out of that family dialogue of judging, just blindly judging, without like, I just started realizing that I actually didn't know some of the people I was actually talking about, or their background, or their history. I didn't understand their context whatsoever. So I started doing research. And this is my day job as a policy analyst. I actually started doing research into the frameworks of political thought that currently form um, our political system. In Canada, it's the British parliamentary system, which is designed around rich people being able to stay rich, which is sort of a lot of other systems too, right? And the British, exported the parliamentary system around the world through their empire. And we have variations of the parliamentary system versus the republican system, the way it is set up constitutionally in the United States. I also having the contrast in my family, where my grandfather was a Mennonite minister, uh, very, very adamant about how, Christ is the path and the way. and me kind of, rebelling as a teenager, wanting to kind of disassociate, but, judging my grandfather and my grandparents, my Mennonite grandparents, for their blind faith and not understanding what they had gone through to actually get to that blind faith, that conviction. Even though I had conviction in my own skills, my own understanding of reality, uh, understanding judgment based on political orientation or religious orientation is one of the things that I had to come to grips with. And these are two huge aspects of human experience. Also, understanding, getting into some of my other skills as a medium and a channel, as my voice starts to change timbre here. This is what happens when I start looking into that other space, the realities of being a channel, and actually accepting when I started looking into the divine hierarchies of, your people are talking about the quantum field now, and the divine hierarchies are are what hold that quantum field that humans are just beginning to understand how to access. Um, when I began to connect with my natural talents as a medium and a channel, um, the realities of mental frameworks. This is sort of an aspect where we believe that the mind has the ultimate reasoning tools, but it doesn't. The mind is kind of like the antenna and the dials on the radio station, jukebox, whatever you want to call it. um, so as I was talking, I was starting to look into that other space and the ancestral information in terms of my family's imprinting, emotional imprinting of judgment and personal language being based in judgment. And when I began to look deeper into spiritual frameworks and sit with myself and meditate and work on opening myself up energetically, um, I began to understand that the mental frameworks that I thought were reality were not based in a heart centered mindfulness, which is where the dichotomy and the separation from our higher selves, our spiritual selves, really resides. So on the whole body like goosebumps and thoughts there. Um, the the way that polarity works is that the darkness has to come to the surface in order for us to see it, and to see it we feel it, and that way we can choose what does not align with heart and soul and spirit. A lot has been hidden because we haven't wanted to look, because accepting how we have supported violence and unhinged emotion as being okay, and how we've let that form our society and have based our societal mores on it without looking at the deeper spiritual ramifications, are why there's so much of it today, because it hasn't been dealt with. Um, the lesson is always transmutation, is always understanding how strong we are to accept responsibility and to change how we think and how we feel about things, and to see that there is another choice, the choice of alignment with our higher selves. And the spiritual truth is that there is no separation amongst us, that spiritually we are all working towards the same path and the same goal of unification with our heart. And this is one of the reasons why qigong is so important. The quantum mechanics, the string theory are really, really important, because the frequency and vibration crowd, the frequency and vibration information that is out there is really important to understand in terms of how the bonds, the energetic bonds at the molecular and atomic structures actually are string theory, and filament particles that vibrate with the energy of creation. So when we practice Qigong and we open our bodies and we move the blood to massage and to heal our body and to calm and regulate our nervous system, we actually open up ourselves to feeling that space, which is very quiet, which is very different than the agitation in the external world. I'm still trying to get my voice back to normal, but I'm not. I got pulled right over to that other side. There are universal truths, but they're not expressed in man-made creations at this point in time. We have books that point the way. We have people that have taught the way and expressed the way. And it is for us to learn how to listen to that wisdom, learn how to through our bodies, not just our minds, but through the whole integration of feeling and feeling safe with feeling even the extremely uncomfortable mental spaces and thoughts that we have, like self violence, where we judge ourselves for not achieving a certain amount of success. Being on this planet, anyone who is on this planet, any anyone and everyone is actually an advanced soul because of what this planet is. The living library, it's been referred to the next portal to the next layer of emanation from creation, if you will. My understanding is that the entirety of the human experience is about understanding how to be comfortable with the darkness, to see it for what it is the agitation, is the ungrounded, um, in a sense, the unloved, and to accept that the violence is not who we are, because anything that is violent, anything that is in agitation is in separation. But to see the lesson in seeing the darkness and the spaces that we ourselves go through emotionally reflect what's going on in the outside world. One of the main things that I've discovered through just even researching politics here in Canada, anything that is about control, anything that creates conflict, anything that creates fear is not heart based. Our self judgment, how you judge yourself, is how you judge others. How you get angry at yourself and how you take fuel from conflict, internal conflict, emotional conflict, is essentially reflected in the outside world. How people manifest things. Why do bad things happen to good people? It's like sometimes there's no accounting for other people's shadow or what a person has in their energy field and how shadow takes advantage of that. And it's really important to understand that anything in the outside world is basically um, bread and circuses to keep us distracted from accepting responsibility for what we've created and understanding that co-creation. If there's no communication happening, if there's no real conversation, if it's just finger pointing and blame and guilt and shaming and humiliation, or people driving for humiliation of the other side, that's not heart centered. Um, it's one of the things that I've encountered in the Green Party, the NDP, the PCs, Liberals here in Canada. Everybody wants to point the fingers and pass the buck, and they don't have a plan. They don't see how things are going to get done. They don't talk about the mechanics. They just make proclamations. They don't engage the citizenry. They talk over the heads of the citizenry. When you have leaders who actually openly engage public debate in good faith, one of the things that happened with the previous illustrious leader of Canada is that he immediately had open houses so that he could say that he had consulted with the people. When the open houses that I went to, it was very clear that there is already a predetermined outcome. When there is a predetermined outcome, and it's obviously that someone has not come to have a conversation or to listen, but they're already feeding you information based on their ideology. Um, it's separation. When there's no real communication, no two-way, non-violent communication, non-judgmental communication. Um, if no one has ever heard of Marshall Rosenberg and his work on nonviolent communication, I thoroughly recommend you go and research his work. Brilliant, brilliant man. He specialized in conflict resolution and he wrote some incredible, simple books that are really easy to understand the concept of nonviolent communication. And basically, everything in politics is violent communication.
Mm.
Blame and embarrassment and one-upmanship
Yeah.
of who's more right or who's more wrong, scandals, this, that, and the other thing. That's not leadership. That's sandbox, you know,
Okay.
crybaby communication. And again, I come from my example of a political leader, of an actual servant of the people, comes from my grandfather Whalen. My Grandpa Ed was one of these people, even when he was not needing to campaign, he was always out in the community. He was always talking to the people. He had an open line, a direct line to himself to let people talk to him. He believed in communication. That's what I grew up understanding politics should be. But generally, right now, it isn't. There are a lot of things in terms of left versus right. People like to promote people like, Marx. Marxist thought is sort of very big right now. Again, except what people don't understand is that Marx was a trust fund baby. He lived off of the dividends of other people's work. He had a friend that he constantly blackmailed into giving him money. And he blackmailed his family and coerced his family into giving him money so he didn't have to work. So understanding the origin, the original context, and the evolution of a thought is really important. Understanding what we're dealing with today. It's like, you want to understand what's going on in the Ukraine, look up the Khazarian Empire. If people don't understand the historical context for a conflict and they just jump right into promoting one side over the other without understanding the historical context, like the Roman presence in the Middle East and how we're still dealing with the mess that the Romans made in the province of Palestine, for instance, you know, historical context and the history is generally the origin point where things start. And the what's going on in the Ukraine is thousands of years old. What's going on in the Middle East and in the province of Palestine is the old Roman province of Palestine is again thousands of years old. Anything that is based in I've actually spent a fair bit of time in this space lately. Well, more so since my dad passed. Anything that is based in fear or judgment or us versus them is not heart centered. Never is. Discernment is very, very different. Heart based discernment. When you understand the origin point of fear and anger in oneself, then you can understand violence in the outside world. Um, there is there is no simple remedy for societal or systemic violence. There's no easy remedy. It requires really hard conversations. And until people are actually ready for those conversations, we're going to be looping. the old patterns over and over and over again.
People don't like accepting that they have violence in their minds or in their hearts, and that's the first step. That's honestly the first step. If you're human, you have violence in you. It's the ancestral memory. It's the societal, cultural programming, the us versus them programming, um, and people need to look at that. People like to present themselves as very spiritual, but they don't have um, real self awareness, and they don't accept the pain that they hold in their bodies and how it's expressed openly. They don't want to. People who are generally on a spiritual path want to believe that they're doing good because they're on a spiritual path. But until they understand that separation between the mind and the heart and how that creates that in of itself, without being centered, without understanding calm and observation, and that's why qigong is so important because it'll give you that baseline of feeling the body in those different states while you practice. This is why sitting meditation is also extremely valuable. It's that space of observation. And when you open up to, I mean, not everyone's going to be psychic or a medium or a channel, but it's like understand the history that you are on the receiving end of. Go like, I was so lucky growing up reading. I grew up in a house full of books uh for the internet, with the Britannica Atlas, which is like 30 volumes of like all the basic information about all the countries and all the concepts and history, politics, religion, and all this other stuff. Um, when you understand the historical context of an issue, the background, like looking into ourselves, when you look into an issue, look at both sides of the issue, look at the history of a region where a conflict is. The website Academy of Embodiment Arts is there. I do healing sessions in person or at a distance. Um, and I also do channelings and talk people through some of their. My wife is a hypnotherapist. We sometimes do workshops both online and in person. We actually have one coming up on the rays of creation and understanding the energy centers of the body through the rays of creation and not just the chakra system. But yeah, um, happy to talk to people who have questions.